Today, Mr. Michael combed his hair neatly, dabbed on a bit of old cologne he found in the drawer, and put on the white dress shirt he had saved for special occasions. It had been a long time since he cared this much about his appearance. Part of it was nerves. Part of it was respect for a first date after many years of living alone. At 65, he was no longer the kind of man who waited eagerly for love the way he once did in his 20s. But somewhere deep inside there was still a quiet emptiness, a space that used to belong to a gentle wife who had passed away 3 years ago. Since then, he had lived quietly in his small 2-bedroom apartment. No noise, no fuss, but also no familiar voice to greet the morning, no shared laughter to end the day. His life was simple. In the morning, he tended to the flower pots by the porch. At noon, he read books under the hum of a ceiling fan. In the afternoon, he stopped by the nearby library where he volunteered. His daughter lived in New York, busy with her own work and life. He never asked for much, just looked at the old photo on the wall from time to time, remembering the days when dinner was for two. The idea of going on a date didn't come from him. It came from Mrs. Linda, the friendly neighbor, who often organized community events. She told him about Christine, a retired nurse who lived just a few blocks away, also single, also looking for companionship. Michael nodded, not too quickly, not with hesitation either. He wasn't hoping for anything grand, just a kind conversation with someone from his own generation. He understood clearly. At this age, people don't look for love like in the movies. They just hope for someone to sit beside them, to share silence without feeling lonely, someone to brew a cup of tea, someone to sit and watch the sunset and make the day feel like it meant something. He came to the cafe with that in mind, gently, open enough to let someone in, careful enough to protect what was still tender. What he didn't know was that this meeting would wake something in him, not a flutter of romance, but a quiet realization of what he truly needed in the years ahead. Part 1, the meeting and the first flicker of hope. Michael arrived 15 minutes early. He chose the table by the window, where the late morning light was soft enough to ease the tightness in his chest. The cafe was small and cozy with the gentle scent of baked goods floating in the air. The barista, familiar with his face, brought out a cappuccino before he even ordered. He was a regular here on Wednesdays. Today was Saturday, but he needed something familiar to steady his nerves. Lately, Michael found himself growing more anxious when meeting new people. Not out of fear, but because he no longer had the patience for pretense. He hoped today would be simple. Just an honest conversation. No pressure. No expectations. If they could feel at ease sitting beside each other, that would be enough. Christine arrived right on time. She wore a pale blue blouse, her hair neatly pinned up, with small earrings that glinted gently in the light. She didn't stand out, but there was something composed and attentive about her. When Michael stood to greet her, she smiled, not wide, not forced, just warm. They began with small talk, a few words about the weather, a bit about favorite kinds of coffee. The conversation unfolded easily, like two people who had met before in another life. Christine spoke about her years as a nurse, about the pressure of caring for others, and the resilience the job demanded. She spoke slowly, clearly, not boasting, but not hiding the weariness either. She mentioned her son, a computer engineer living in Chicago. He didn't call often, but still sent cards on holidays. She chuckled. He's not great at expressing things, but I know he loves me in his own way. Michael listened, nodding now and then. When it was his turn, he shared stories from his years teaching, the troublemaking students he both dreaded and secretly adored. He mentioned his daughter, someone he tried not to bother, even though he always hoped for one more surprise call. Then he talked about his small garden, the chrysanthemums that bloomed year-round, the basil that squirrels kept chewing down to nubs. Their conversation lingered in simple places. There were no flirtations, no promises, but something began to stir quietly, the feeling of being understood. Michael was surprised by how comfortable he felt. Maybe it was because Christine didn't rush. She didn't try to guess what he'd say next. She allowed silence to show up, then filled it gently with an everyday story. They talked about old movies, home-cooked meals, and the way people slowly learn how to be alone without feeling lonely. An hour passed faster than he expected. The weight of time lifted unlike other afternoons. He wasn't thinking about how this would end. He only thought that if they met again tomorrow, he might tell her about the book he was reading. But then, like a breeze shifting direction, Christine leaned forward slightly. Her expression turned more serious. Her voice was still soft, but something had changed, as if she were about to say something she had weighed carefully. Michael sat up straight. He sensed a turning point in their exchange, and just as his instincts told him, from the moment of that first smile, everything began to take on a different tone. Part 2, the conditions that woke him up. Christine took a small sip of her coffee, then gently placed the cup back on the table. She looked at Michael with calm eyes, though the lightness from earlier had softened into something more serious. Her voice dropped slightly, part confession, part a well-prepared list. Before things go any further, she said, I want to share a few important things. Michael nodded. He had always valued honesty. At this age, no one has time for emotional guessing games. Still, he didn't expect what he was about to hear to cause such a quiet shift in his heart. Christine's first request was a 6-month trial period of living together, a sort of test run before committing to anything long-term. Michael wasn't surprised. On some level, he understood the caution that comes from experience. 2 strangers living under one roof was no simple matter. A trial period seemed fair, but then came the key detail. To begin this phase, Christine wanted him to transfer $20,000 into a joint account. Not to spend, she clarified, just as a guarantee. So I know you're serious. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. $20,000 wouldn't ruin him. But the fact that she called it a guarantee made something inside him feel off. He kept his expression steady, but a quiet current began to stir beneath the surface. Wasn't love supposed to be built on presence, time, and trust? When it begins with a dollar amount, what exactly are we building? Christine went on. If things went well, the money would remain untouched. If they broke up early, she would return a portion based on the length of time they lived together. It sounded reasonable, even organized. But suddenly, Michael didn't feel like someone searching for a life companion. He felt like a client signing a rental agreement. He stayed quiet, neither agreeing nor objecting, just listening, letting the words sink in. Then Christine moved on to her second condition, one that sparkled a bit more. She shared one of her dreams, a full month in Hawaii. Not just a vacation, but an experience. A time to relax, recharge, and capture professional photos to mark this new chapter of life. Michael couldn't deny the image was beautiful. Evening walks along the beach, helicopter tours over volcanoes, sunrise on golden sands. Anyone would be charmed. Then she added, You'll cover the entire trip. She smiled. Don't worry, I'll take care of the arrangements, flights, hotels, everything. You just relax. Michael smiled back, but something inside him grew heavy. A month in Hawaii was not cheap. And for someone retired like him, it was no small ask. It wasn't just about money, it was the pace. They had been sitting here for less than 2 hours, and already she was picturing them, posing for photo albums in tropical paradise. He started to feel a quiet distance forming between them. Christine was building a beautiful castle, but hadn't asked if he wanted to live in it. Then came the third condition, and that's when Michael felt himself slowly stepping away from the hopeful path he had started on. Christine said that if they lived together long-term or got married, she would manage all the household finances. She had experience. She'd been a head nurse. She knew how to budget and handle money. I'll give you a monthly allowance, she said. The rest I'll take care of. And if you overspend, well, you could help with cleaning or cooking to make up for it. Michael let out a small laugh, unsure if she was joking, but Christine's eyes said she wasn't. At that moment, he didn't feel angry, just unfamiliar. He had lived his entire life independently, in charge of his choices, his finances, his rhythm. To hand that over to someone he had just met, what man in his position would feel comfortable with that? He had always thought of love as partnership, but this sounded more like management, where he would no longer be a companion, but a man given a budget. Michael said nothing. He remained polite, steady, because he knew how to contain himself. But inside, something was beginning to close, like a door gently returning to its frame. Then came the final condition, and with it, the end of a brief journey of hope. Christine said that whether they lived together or got married, they would sleep in separate rooms, not because of rejection, not because of emotional distance, but because she was used to her own space and needed absolute quiet to sleep well. Michael understood. At their age, many people prefer it that way, but following everything else, the money, the vacation, the control, this didn't feel like a personal choice anymore. It felt like a boundary drawn in stone. A reminder that he might be close, but never allowed fully in. When Christine finished speaking, Michael didn't feel disappointment. He felt clarity, like someone who has walked through fog and finally sees the road ahead. Today's meeting wasn't a failure. It was a reminder. He didn't resent Christine. She had every right to set the terms she believed were necessary, but he also had the right to say no. Part 3, the decision and the quiet release. Christine sat still after speaking, her eyes quietly awaiting a response. It wasn't a probing look, but one filled with near-complete confidence, as if everything she had said was perfectly reasonable. honest and not up for debate. Michael looked at her for a long time, not because he was confused, but because he wanted to respond in a way that honored who he was, kind, clear, and never cruel. He didn't rush to speak. In that brief silence, he seemed to revisit the entire path of his life. A life of steady work, not wealthy but full enough. A long, simple, warm marriage. A daughter who had grown up into a thoughtful and kind young woman. And now it was just him, sitting in this little cafe across from a woman who might have become a life companion, if only he could step into the world she had laid out before him. But he could not. Michael smiled, a soft, sincere smile. He spoke gently, but with quiet strength. "Thank you for being honest," he said. "I believe you have your reasons for everything you've shared, but I'm afraid I can't agree to those things." Christine's brow tensed just slightly. She wasn't angry, but she couldn't hide her disappointment. Michael didn't offer excuses. He didn't feel the need to explain. The difference between them wasn't about age or circumstance. It was about how they saw relationships. One needing security through conditions, the other hoping for a gentle connection, free of contracts and terms. He stood and excused himself, saying he had another appointment. It wasn't a lie. It was a gentle way to leave. A soft exit for them both. Christine nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't try to stop him. As Michael stepped outside, he was surprised by how cool the air felt. The early afternoon sun filtered through the trees, scattering soft shadows across the sidewalk, like a carpet of shifting light. He walked slowly, hands in his coat pockets, his heart no longer weighed down. In the quiet of the street, he began to feel something clear take shape. He had made the right decision, not because Christine was wrong. She was living by what she believed she needed. But that didn't mean he had to agree. Back home, he made himself a cup of Earl Grey, the tea his late wife had loved. He carried it to the porch and sat in the same old chair where he always spent his mornings. The wind stirred gently through the garden. A sparrow hopped from branch to branch, not too lively, not too still, just enough to remind him the world was still turning in all its quiet beauty. He didn't feel sad. Perhaps a few years ago, he might have felt let down by a date that didn't work out. But not now. Now he didn't need a relationship just to fill an empty space. He needed something real. And if that hadn't come yet, he knew he could still live well with himself. Michael thought of his friends, some who had remarried, some still searching, others who had stopped trying altogether. Each person had their own way of walking through old age. For him, perhaps peace didn't come from having someone beside him, but from knowing he didn't have to give up who he was, just to be loved. Christine helped him see that. Even in just one morning, she helped him look inward, more clearly than he had in a long time. And with that, he smiled, not a smile of joy, not one of sadness, but a smile of quiet release. Light, like the feeling you get when you close a door that was never meant to be yours. Part 4, Reflections on Love in the Later Years. The days that followed passed quietly. Michael didn't dwell on the date, not because he wanted to forget it, but because he had let it go gently, like a short piece of music that ends before turning into the wrong tune. He returned to his familiar rhythm. Morning plant care, afternoon reading, evening tea on the porch, watching the streetlights slowly blink to life. Now and then he scribbled a few lines in his journal. Not long entries, just scattered thoughts, like folding up an ordinary day and placing it in a small drawer. But something inside him had shifted. Before, he used to think that if he didn't try harder to open his heart, loneliness would grow and swallow his old age. Like darkness filling a room with no light. Now he understood. Loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being with someone and still feeling unseen, still unable to be yourself. Old age, in truth, doesn't ask for much. Not passionate lovers, not grand plans or luxurious trips. Just someone who can look into your eyes, understand the tiredness left behind from years of holding everything together, and never ask you to become someone else in order to be loved. Young love often begins with longing, but love in the later years, if it comes, should begin with stillness. The kind of stillness found only in people who have lived enough to know that presence matters more than promises. Michael didn't blame Christine for the conditions she set. In some quiet corner of his heart, he even felt a little tenderness for her. Perhaps she had once been hurt, once depended too much, once lost control, and now she had built herself a fortress, not to keep people out, but to make sure no one could enter, without meeting every rule she'd written for protection. But Michael knew, love isn't a prize for those who pass a test. It's a meeting between two souls, who don't have to force compatibility, because they already recognized something true in each other. After that date, Michael didn't rush to search again. Not because he had given up, but because he was beginning to feel at peace with himself. He had started to cherish the small things. The sound of water boiling in the kitchen, the smell of old paper from a half-read novel, the wind nudging the curtain at dusk. And more than anything, he had learned something important. Do not enter a relationship just to avoid loneliness. If that relationship will make you feel even more alone, love at any age must begin with kindness. Kindness to others, and kindness to yourself. If you must trade your peace just to have someone beside you, then that presence becomes a hollow shadow. No shape, no soul. Michael knew there would come a time when he would open his heart again. Maybe during a community event, maybe at a spring book fair, maybe through an unexpected call from someone who once crossed his path. But next time, he would show up, not because he needed someone to fill a space, but because he was full enough to share. Because when you are truly at peace with yourself, you no longer look for someone to complete you. You wait for the one gentle enough to walk beside you. Closing. Dear friends, the story of Michael comes to a close here. On quiet afternoons, he often sits out on the porch, a warm cup of tea in hand. The golden light of the day stretches across the little path in front of his home. A few leaves fall gently like a soft farewell from the season's end. And he smiles. Not because someone has just knocked on his door, but because he knows now he is no longer afraid of being alone. If this story touched you in some way, please consider clicking like, share, and subscribe to the Light of Wise Elders channel. Your support means the world to us and encourages our team to keep creating. Thank you and see you again soon.